So, you know how sometimes it feels like there's this whole instruction manual for relationships that we just never got?
Totally.
Like, shouldn't this whole relationship thing be a little more intuitive?
Yeah.
Well, you are not alone. And that is exactly why today we're diving into this PDF, How to Build Healthy Relationships. It's easy, actually.
I like it already.
Because who doesn't want a little more easy in their life, right?
Nice.
Especially when it comes to relationships.
Exactly. And you know what's really interesting about this PDF is it really pushes this idea that we need to forget those like picture perfect relationship goals that we see everywhere.
Right.
Like it's not about achieving some mythical.
Yeah, it's true though. It's almost like we've been kind of conditioned to think that relationships should be this perfectly orchestrated dance. But like in reality, it's so much more like learning to waltz in the dark with someone you really like, you know?
Yeah.
Bumping into furniture every now and then.
Exactly. And it's okay to bump into the furniture every once in a while, right? Like this PDF actually uses this, I think, really effective analogy of comparing relationships to gardens.
Okay.
Right? You wouldn't expect a garden to thrive without like regular care and attention.
Right.
You've got to water it.
You got to tend to it.
You've got to make sure it's getting the right amount of
sunlight.
Sunlight, exactly. Relationships, they need that same kind of nurturing.
Okay, I like that. So it's not about like the grand romantic gesture all the time, but more so those small but consistent actions that you're taking to show the other person that you care. Like, have you ever been so caught up in your own stuff that you forget to even ask your partner how their day was?
Oh, absolutely. We've all been there. And this PDF really highlights how crucial it is to actually listen. When they do share, not just nodding along, but active listening.
Okay, so this is where things, I think, get really interesting. Because most of us, I think, like to believe that we're pretty good listeners. But this PDF kind of challenges that assumption a little bit. It's so easy to get stuck in our own heads while the other person's talking.
Oh, yeah.
And you're already thinking about like what you're going to say next. Or let's be honest, just scrolling through your phone.
It's so true. And it takes a conscious effort to really set those distractions aside. But when you do, and you're really present in that moment, and you're focused on the other person, that's when that active listening really happens.
So what does that look like?
Well, it can be as simple as like making eye contact, asking clarifying questions, reflecting back what you hear, you know, just to make sure you're really understanding. It's about really making them feel heard and valued.
It's so true. And it's not even always about like the words themselves, right? The PDF also talks about paying attention to like the unspoken cues. Like those moments where maybe someone's feeling down, but they're trying to like put on a brave face.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. It's like that saying, you know, listen to what's being said even when words aren't being used.
Oh, I like that.
That's where empathy really becomes powerful. Because you're not just hearing their words, you're really tuning in to like the emotions behind those words.
Yeah.
Which can be so much more valuable than like any advice or quick fix that you could offer.
You know, this actually reminds me of this one time. My friend was telling me about like this whole thing that was going on at work. And she was like really upset about it. And I just like immediately jumped into like problem solving mode.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, you should do this and you should say that. And later she was like, you know what I really needed in that moment was just for someone to listen and validate how I was feeling.
Oh, yeah. It's so easy to do that, though.
I know.
To jump into that fixer mode.
It is.
When really what they need is just like a listening ear.
Exactly.
And that actually leads perfectly into, I think, the next crucial element that this PDF really highlights, and that's communication.
Okay.
It might sound obvious, but they argue that clear and honest communication is like 90% of what makes a relationship work.
90%, they really said that.
They did.
Wow. Okay, well, I mean, it makes sense when you really think about it.
Yeah.
But how do they say we can actually get better at it?
Yeah.
Because just saying, like, communicate more feels a little vague.
Yeah, totally. It's like, okay, what does that even mean? But thankfully, they break it down into some really practical tips.
Okay, good.
Like, they really emphasize being direct and upfront about your needs and feelings instead of, like, dropping hints or hoping your partner can, like, read your mind. Because let's be honest, most of the time,
they can't.
They can't.
Yeah.
Which is so hard because it's so easy to fall into those traps, like passive aggressiveness. Especially when we're worried about, like, rocking the boat or creating conflict.
Totally.
But this PDF makes a really good point. That kind of indirect communication, it just breeds resentment over time because you're not actually addressing the issue at hand.
Right.
You're just kind of like tiptoeing around it and hoping that like maybe they'll magically figure it out.
Right.
Which never really happens.
Yeah. Right.
So they give this classic scenario in the PDF. Let's say your partner is like heading out the door for like the third time this week.
Mhm.
and you just mumble something like, oh, you're going out again. When what you really mean is, hey, I miss spending quality time with you,
Yes.
right? But learning to articulate those needs directly can be huge.
It's a game changer.
It is a game changer.
Yeah.
And it's not just about what you say, it's how you say it too.
Oh, that's so true.
Yeah.
Because like your tone and delivery can completely change the meaning
Yeah.
of what you're trying to get across.
Exactly.
Or-
Like sometimes a simple shift in tone from like accusatory to curious
Mhm.
can completely change the whole dynamic of the conversation.
It really can.
And you know what else this PDF touches on that I found really insightful?
What's that?
It's this idea that conflict in a relationship isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right, because I feel like,
Most of us kind of see conflict as like a failure.
yeah.
Like we try to avoid it at all costs.
Exactly. And while it's natural to want to avoid conflict, this PDF actually presents a really different perspective.
Oh.
Like they see conflict as an opportunity for growth
Okay.
and deeper understanding.
Interesting.
It's about shifting our perspective from like winning the argument
Right.
to like finding a solution together
I like that.
as a team.
Mm-hmm.
Because ultimately you're on the same team.
You are.
Right
Yeah.
there.
You're partners.
Yeah. And you know, that reminds me of this one couple I know. And they used to argue all the time about the smallest things, like who left the dishes in the sink or like who forgot to take out the trash.
Oh, yeah.
You know, just like little petty things.
Yep.
And it wasn't until they actually like sat down and had a real conversation about it that they realized it wasn't really about the dishes or the trash at all.
Right.
It was about like these deeper needs for respect and consideration.
Exactly. It's often about uncovering those underlying needs.
Isn't it?
It is.
And this PDF really encourages couples to approach conflict with curiosity
Mm-hmm.
and a willingness to really understand their partner's perspective, even if you don't agree with it.
Yeah. That's big.
Right, because it's not about like who's right or wrong. It's about understanding where the other person's coming from
Yeah.
and trying to find that common ground.
And you know, sometimes it's also about choosing your battles, right?
Absolutely.
Like sometimes the healthiest thing you can do for your relationship is just let go of the need to be right.
It's so true.
You know,
Sometimes it's better to just let it go
it really is.
than to hold on to that need to be right.
Exactly. And this whole idea of finding a balance, it actually comes up again in another part of the PDF that I thought was really interesting.
Okay.
It's this whole part where they talk about balancing me time
Mhm.
and we time.
Okay.
And I have to admit, this one really made me think.
Yeah.
Because is it really that important to have time apart when you're in a relationship?
You know, it might seem kind of counterintuitive,
But-
but this PDF makes a really good case for it because
Yeah.
it's about like maintaining your individuality,
Okay.
nurturing your own interests, your friendships, all of that,
Right.
so that you can then like bring your best self back to the relationship.
Yeah. I can see that.
Yeah.
Because it's like if you're constantly around each other 24/7, you might start to lose sight of yourself a little bit. Like what makes you you?
Exactly.
And then that can actually end up creating tension in the relationship.
Yes, because you don't have that like separate identity, you know?
Right.
So it's about really finding that sweet spot where you're both fulfilled as individuals,
Yeah.
but you're also still connected as a couple.
Okay.
And speaking of keeping that spark alive, this PDF also does not forget about the importance of fun.
Oh, good. Because relationships shouldn't feel like a chore, right?
No, they should be enjoyable. Like you should want to spend time with this person.
Exactly.
And this PDF reminds us that it's those shared moments of joy, laughter, spontaneity that really keep a relationship feeling fresh and exciting.
It's so easy to fall into a routine, though,
It is.
especially as life gets busy.
Yes. Especially as you've been in a relationship for a while.
Yeah.
You know you're comfortable with each other.
Yeah.
But this PDF really warns against letting things get stale.
Okay.
Like they even suggest things like having like a random dance party in your living room
I love that.
just to like,
Just like put on some music
yeah,
and just go for it.
exactly.
It doesn't have to be anything fancy.
It doesn't have to be anything fancy or expensive or planned. Sometimes it's those silly little spontaneous moments that create the most lasting memories,
Totally.
you know?
It's about remembering to be playful
Yeah.
and make time for those little moments of connection.
Yes.
Well, as we wrap up our deep dive today into this, honestly, like refreshingly honest PDF,
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling a renewed sense of hope because it shows us that like building healthy, happy relationships takes effort. There's no doubt about it,
Mm.
but it doesn't have to be this big mystery.
No, it doesn't.
Right.
It's really about just being present,
Yes.
communicating honestly, giving each other space to grow, and never forgetting to inject a little fun along the way.
Beautifully said. It's about remembering why you chose each other in the first place.
Yes.
And finding those small but meaningful ways to nurture that connection.
I love that.
So as you go about your week, maybe think about one thing, just one thing that you can do to add a little spark back into your relationships. It could be as simple as like having a heartfelt conversation with your partner, or like picking up their favorite takeout on the way home.
Yeah, or like sending them a text message in the middle of the day just to say, I'm thinking about you.
Exactly. It's those little gestures that can really make all the difference.
They really can.
Remember, small steps can lead to big change.